This is Red Podcast, episode 245. We're going behind the scenes of a book contract. That's coming up.
This is the Red Podcast. Here's your host, David Hooper.
David Hooper here, back with you. Red Podcast, the podcast for experts. If you're a book author, a speaker, a blogger, a podcaster, somebody with a message, this is the podcast for you. I ran into Jeff Sanders about a year ago. He told me, I will never sign another book contract. 51 weeks ago, ran into him again. He said, hey, I just signed a book contract. So I said, I'm going to get this on tape. I want to talk about what it's like to go through the book writing and publishing process, and I want it as it's happening. You know, so many of these stories we hear about writing books, publishing books, they're revisionist. We change details. We have selective memory. Remember the good parts, not necessarily the bad ones. I wanted it all, though. So this episode, 245, is the first of three. Jeff has just signed the contract. 246, I caught up with him 8 months later. He had just finished his manuscript, was thinking about the launch. In episode 247, he had just launched his book. So we're going to go back in time to when Jeff Sanders had just signed his book contract. Keeping it laid back today on Skype, talking to my friend Jeff Sanders. I ran into him not 2 weeks ago, and he walked up to me and he gave me some shocking news. I thought it would be interesting to record it because Jeff Sanders signed a book deal. A lot of people listening to Red Podcast, you're interested in signing a book deal, so we're going to go through this step by step as Jeff Sanders goes through it. And the thing that made it so shocking to me is that, Jeff, you already had a book deal, and the last time I saw you, the time before this previous time when you told me you got a book deal, you said you would never do it again.
Yeah, that was my opinion. I think that really stemmed from the fact that my original book deal with my first book, The 5 A.M. Miracle, that was a kind of a rough go in a lot of ways. Working with a publisher is really kind of just giving away all of your rights. And I am a control freak. If you know my brand and what I do and how I work, I like to do everything myself if I can. So self-publishing was my kind of go-to next book. I wanted to do everything myself until this next opportunity popped up, and then I changed direction from there.
So before we jump into that, let's talk about your background for people who are not familiar with you. I've had you on Red Podcast a couple times before.
Yeah.
So if you don't know who Jeff Sanders is, what the hell, man? You got one of the top podcasts on iTunes called 5 A.M. Miracle, and that's kind of the brand. But talk a little bit more about who you are and what it is that you do.
Yeah, so basically I kind of take my life and just put it online with the podcast. So I like early mornings, obviously. It's a big part of what I do, but I also like to run marathons. I like to be productive as much as I can. Kind of a high energy guy that likes to kind of eat a lot of bananas and do whatever I can to, get the most value out of my day. And then I just kind of spread that message through the podcast and books and everywhere else online. So yeah, anything that's high energy and that has to do with productivity, I'm all about it.
Before we jump into this new deal, we talked a bit about you having a previous book. It's called 5 A.M. Miracle. Kind of give me the quick and dirty on this, the good, bad, and the ugly of that previous deal. Things you liked about it, things you wish had been different.
The first book deal, it really was one where I said yes right away because an offer came up. Like my podcast had been live for about a year and a half, and I got an email out of the blue that said, hey, do you want to do a book with us? And I was just kind of blown away because I wanted to do a book, but I never had had the idea set aside as like to actually go pitch, agents or publishers, make it happen. So when the opportunity came up from a publisher to do a book, my initial response was just say yes as fast as I can. And so I think that in the process of that, I signed a contract that it wasn't a bad contract. I was new to it and didn't understand what I was signing. And so I got, the process was revealed to me over time as far as, me not having the ability to have an input on the cover design or not getting great editing for my book or really having, zero knowledge of what's going on behind the scenes. I just felt like the majority of the process was out of my hands and I didn't even know what was happening. And so for me, it was this complete lack of control. I wanted to know more. I wanted it to be something that I could be a part of, and I really lost touch with that.
So the current book deal, the one you just signed, it's a larger publisher. What do you think is different about where you were then with the first deal and where you are now with this current deal? What made a larger publisher be attracted to you?
Well, I think that for, majority of my kind of, working life, I've wanted to have a book deal with a large publisher. And I think that maybe that's just kind of my old school thinking of wanting to have kind of that name attached to my brand and being able to say that, like, hey, this big publisher, wants to work with me. That kind of validates my work. I think that's kind of the behind the scenes thinking of why I wanted to say yes to a larger deal in that sense. So the first deal that I got really was just get a book out there. Let's, establish myself as an author kind of book. Whereas this next one, I think in many ways, like, I wanted to validate that the first book wasn't a fluke and that I could get a second deal and that I could actually get out there and produce a second great work. Whether that would be self-published or not, I wanted that to happen regardless. But getting the chance to work with a larger publisher, I just see that as an opportunity in some ways to say that, what I'm doing here is legit and it's not just some fly-by-night, operation, that I'm actually doing real work here. And so I think in some ways that's what I was looking for. And so when the opportunity popped up, it was just kind of hard to pass up.
I think the thing that puts these two book deals in a very similar position is that you were not looking for book deals at the time. You were open to them, but not going out and actually pitching agents or pitching book publishers. Talk a bit about how these guys discovered you.
The first publisher found me through the podcast. The editor at the time was tasked with finding an author to talk about productivity. And so she was just looking online and she happened to find my podcast in iTunes as a search for productivity. She typed that word into iTunes and found my podcast and then said, okay, this guy could be a good fit, and just asked me if I was even interested in doing a book. And so that kind of came about because of the show. Whereas this next publisher found me just on Google looking for kind of the same thing. She was trying to find a time management author or someone that could discuss that topic. And so in that sense, she found my website and then saw that I was a published author already, and then emailed me from there. Both of them found me because I was producing content and had things online. Just the first one was the podcast, and the second one was the website.
So the first deal, the 5 a.m. Miracle, the book is out now. You can buy it at Amazon or wherever books are sold. No control over the cover. You didn't have a lot of control, it sounds like, over the editorial process, who the editor was, the people that they assigned you to, any of the promotion or marketing, or not as much control as you would want. You have more control over this next one? I mean, talk about why you signed. What makes this next deal different, other than it being a larger publisher?
This next one, the publisher, being the fact they are a larger publisher, they have more resources and more connections in ways that will enhance the marketing, that will give me a lot more of the kind of working together as a team aspect. Obviously, this has not yet happened, but from what I've been told, it will be more of a working together environment through the editing process and through even me doing the first draft to make sure that the book is going in the right direction, that everything is kind of on track. So to that degree, I'm expecting to see more of a kind of a teamwork methodology to make this book come together, which is a big reason why I wanted to have a bigger publisher, because I would love to have that feedback and have that encouragement to say that this is, the two of us working together to make a better book than I could ever do on my own. Hopefully that happens. I will see how it pans out at this point, but that's the plan right now.
Yeah, because that first publisher, talk about the editor and what the editor did with the original manuscript that you had.
Well, essentially, I had basically one check-in with my editor in the middle of me doing the book writing, and then I turned in the first draft. And from there, we did about 2 weeks of very limited, spelling and grammar checks. And that was basically the equivalent of my editing process. What you see in the final print is almost exactly verbatim what I turned in for my first copy, which really frustrated me because I wanted the feedback and the improvement and didn't get that. Now, in part, I wrote the book I wanted to write, so I got that out there. Yeah. I think the book could have been so much better if I had had an editor really challenge me to do better work.
Yeah, I think that's one of the things that people hope for, and it sounds like you're hoping for with this new deal, is that these are established book people, whether marketers or editors or even cover designers, and they know what sells, and they know what makes a good book. That would be, in a lot of ways, the only reason for a guy like you to sign a deal, because these days with distribution being so easy through digital platforms, through Amazon, and with a lot of the information that we can get, I mean, you can pretty much get connected with an editor on your own. You got a platform so you can promote it on your own, because those are going to be most of the people that are going to buy your book anyway. Why sign with a publisher? And if you're not getting that pushback, if you're not getting the expertise, it doesn't seem to me that there's a real advantage in today's world like there would have been maybe 20 or 30 years ago, where they owned the printing presses and they owned the stores and they owned the distribution methods.
Yeah, I mean, there's no doubt that self-publishing today is so much more valuable than it ever has been, and that's why that was my plan originally. And honestly, my next book may be self-published for those reasons alone. I was talking with an author recently who made that switch and jumped from doing lots of deals with big-name publishers to doing books on her own. And it just seems to be that that's the trend, because you get the control, and because, like you said, I have a platform already. And if I can market the book well, then I may as well kind of do it myself. So that may be my, book number 3 could easily be that way.
I know for me, being in a similar position that you are, of having my own platform, we'll call it, and having the ability to put out books on my own, I feel like there's always that, like, well, I've heard all these publishing stories, but maybe this time is going to be different. And there's always that hope that big publisher is really going to push me. And I think that I probably would roll the dice if a major publisher came to me, just because I want to have that experience. With that said, I had a failed major publishing deal for my very first book, and that's actually what drove me to self-publishing. But there's something about it, though. There's something about it, because they do have distribution and they do have a marketing staff, and getting your books into stores, that's difficult. Then you've got to get the books out of stores. They can help you with that as well, in theory. I can't fault you for going for this. It sounds super exciting. Can you talk about the timeline? Because one of the issues I know with self-publishing myself is that I've got no timeline. I've got an editor that I'm working with, but it's not the same as working with a company and having to give back a down payment or a royal deposit or advance or whatever you call it. So let's talk about the timeline and kind of the pressures that are on you to get this book out, because you just signed this deal within the last couple of weeks, right?
Yeah, I just signed the book deal 2 weeks ago, and right away in the contract, they were asking me to turn the book in just under 6 months. So I have until October 1st to get that first draft done. That includes everything from my own research to endorsements on the book, and all kinds of other little nicks and knacks I have to turn in. That's actually not an inappropriate amount of time. I think it fits pretty well. I have the summer now kind of blocked off to do a lot of writing. So I think that the time frame is not really the issue. It's just a question of me prioritizing time to write. I don't think the timeline in this case is really going to be a big deal.
You mentioned the previous deal, there was more or less one check-in, then you turn in the final manuscript. Are there benchmarks along the way with this newer, bigger publisher that they're going to kind of hold you by the hand and work you through this next 6 months?
There's a few, but there's not that many more. It's probably like 3 or 4 check-ins over the next couple of months, basically just enough to make sure that I'm on the right track. I think that the majority of the work, as I've been told so far, will happen after that's turned in. So there's probably about a 3-month invasive editing process where my book will be dissected quite a bit. So I may do a lot of rewrites at that point, but at least at this point, I think it's just a few minor check-ins to make sure I'm still heading in the right direction.
I'm curious if there's any kind of mentorship, because this book, let's say it's 60,000 words. Do you know how long it's going to be?
They asked for 45,000, actually.
Okay, so 45,000 over 6 months. So let's say 8,000 words per month. Like in the check-in in a couple months, are they expecting 16,000 words from you? Are they expecting more because they know you need time to go back and edit it? Do they break things up like that?
They haven't yet. I think that's what's going to come next. I have a meeting with my editor in a couple of weeks to discuss all of that in more detail. I would assume they're going to look for those kinds of milestones to make sure I'm still getting the work done. I don't tend to write in that way. I kind of do a lot of work all at once, and then I kind of sit back and do a lot of research. And so my actual pattern of writing may not fit what they're looking for, but we'll see how it comes out.
Talk about that for a minute, because there's a lot of pressure. You're working with a bigger company now. They're expecting results from you, and they want it on their timeline because that's when they're going to release it. They know about their release dates. They know about scheduling the book for release within their other releases. So it's not really on your timeline so much anymore. Talk about the pressure and kind of how you're approaching this on a day-to-day basis. We joked around earlier. Not joked around. I've joked around, I guess, with you in the past about 5 a.m. You're the 5 a.m. guy. And you seem like a very efficient guy, but is that your approach to this book?
Good question. I think that in many ways, what the 5 a.m. miracle is, I'm probably going to be kind of making an escape from that and kind of shifting gears to this next book. I don't yet know like what this book will mean for my brand overall, aside from the fact that it's going to kind of solidify that the work I do is based in productivity and time management. I think that if anything, I'm going to have to kind of get a little brilliant on my side and have some new creative ideas to push not just this book to be unique, but also to make sure that my brand has, multiple components that aren't just the same message being said in 1,000 different ways. And so I think that my biggest pressure at this point is making sure that I can deliver high value that's also somewhat innovative or refreshing for the brand and for my next readers who don't read both books and then think I said the same thing twice.
Well, one of the reasons I wanted to have you on now, right after you signed the book deal, is so we can walk with you through this process. So I'm going to be checking in with you in the next few weeks after that initial meeting, kind of give you a mid-check in the middle of this 6-month period to say like, hey, Jeff, how's it going? Is this what you expected? How is it working with the editor? Is this better than your last deal? And certainly to talk about the release and how they work out with you, because I imagine that would be a lot of pressure because you're kind of getting to know each other. I mean, they're getting to know you, but you're getting to know them as well. And you want to put on a good impression, so they'll go out and market it.
Yeah, I mean, that's the idea. If anything, I want to make sure that they love me and want to promote this book like crazy. So I think a big part of my own goals is to make sure that, if anything, I write a great book for the publisher, is not just the reader, so that I have that relationship with them that's established, so I can get better marketing, maybe future book deals if that's the direction I want to go. It works to my advantage to really deliver as the best book that I can.
As I mentioned earlier, a lot of people who listen to this podcast, they're interested in a book deal. They're self-published and want to go the next level. What is your advice for somebody who's interested in getting a book deal?
My very first book that I wrote, which has never seen the light of day, called Graduated and Clueless, was a book that I wrote right after college, and I wrote the entire book over about an 18-month period, and then I went out and I pitched agents to try to get a book deal. I was told repeatedly that the book was okay, but I had no audience, and so they basically wouldn't even consider me until I had a platform already established. And so I think that having seen what happened now twice in a row with these editors that found me either on iTunes or on Google, these editors are looking for authors on specific topics. They're tasked to go out and find an author that would fit whatever their publisher told them to go find. And so in this sense, because I had a website, because I had a platform, because I had a following, and with this latest book deal, because I had good sales of my first book, they could see that I am a viable candidate to sell more of this next book. Some of them will have like a minimum number of sales they want to see, but really it's just about like, do you have an audience that wants to buy you and buy your books? And if you've got that established, then publishers are going to want to work with you immediately. But the hard part is having that audience, is building that platform so that you can actually get that next book deal without having to convince them that you are worth their time. The convincing is really done in the numbers.
Absolutely. When I was in the music industry, which is very similar to the book business, we used to say, I like this record better the more copies it sells. We're making art in the music industry. Book publishers, they're making art, but there's also that business element of it. And they want to know that the book is going to be successful. It's going to be able to reach people. Because even if it's the best book in the world, if it doesn't reach people, what's the point? So I think you have some good advice there. You're out speaking. You're doing the podcast. You've got a big email list. You've got an active social media following. It's absolutely the kind of thing that we talk about here on Red Podcast. The book just fits right into that. It's not like a be-all, end-all thing that's going to make you famous or get your message out there, but it's one part of many things that's going to help do both of those things.
Yeah, exactly. I view the book as I viewed my podcast, which is another marketing arm of the business. And so it's just another pillar to kind of add to this entire larger, business model that I have going on. And so the more of those things I have, the more likely someone is to find that book, and they'll find the other book, and they'll find the podcast. And it's just, as many ways as I possibly can get my message out there, I'm going to try and do that. And so this is just kind of the next version of that.
So stay tuned to this space. Go to redpodcast.com to subscribe to hear more from Jeff Sanders as we follow him throughout this journey. And Jeff, as I mentioned, one of the top podcasts on iTunes, 5 a.m. Miracle, available wherever you get your podcast, not just on iTunes. Is that the best way for people to get in touch with you, Jeff, or how do you want people to find out more about you?
JeffSanders.com is a place to go if you want to learn more about what I'm up to. My email address also, jeff@jeffsanders.com. Go ahead and email me.
That easy.
That's right.
All right, Jeff, thanks for being here on Red Podcast.
Yeah, thank you, David.
There you have it, Jeff Sanders, at the very beginning of his book contract. That was a year ago. That book, available now, it's called Free Time Formula. More information on how to get it, that's at redpodcast.com/245. This is part 1 of a 3-part series, episode 246. Checking in with Jeff right after he completed his manuscript for this book. Episode 247, another check-in, but that one right after the launch. So to make sure that you get those, go to redpodcast.com, hit the subscribe button. That way you will never miss an episode. Thanks for listening to Red Podcast. I'll see you on the next one.
You've been listening to Red Podcast. Never miss an episode. Subscribe now with your iPhone, Android, or via RSS at redpodcast.com.